The clock on the dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m. as Special Agent Rodriguez guided her unmarked black sedan through the empty streets of suburban Virginia. Her eyes were burning from staring at surveillance cameras for the past 14 hours, tracking one of the most dangerous drug cartel leaders in the region. The operation had been intense, sitting in a cramped van, drinking nothing but cold coffee, and eating stale sandwiches while monitoring every movement of their target. The streets were quiet now, almost peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you think about your bed waiting at home. Rodriguez couldn't help but smile, thinking about her dog who was probably curled up on her pillow right now. Her neighbor always took care of him during these long operations, but she missed the Furball's excited welcome home dance. As she drove, her mind wandered to the mountain of paperwork waiting for her at the field office. The thought alone made her shoulders feel heavier. She had to document every minute detail of the surveillance operation, every person who entered the target location, every vehicle that passed by, every phone call that was intercepted. It was the part of the job that TV shows never showed, but it was just as important as the action-packed moments. The radio played softly in the background, some late-night talk show host discussing conspiracy theories about aliens. Rodriguez chuckled to herself, if only they knew about the real investigations that happened in the dark hours of the night. Her thoughts drifted to the operation they'd been working on for the past 6 months. They were getting close, really close. Today's surveillance had confirmed their suspicions about the cartel's new distribution route. She adjusted her posture in the seat, trying to work out the stiffness in her back. 14 hours in a surveillance van wasn't kind to anyone's spine. The coffee from her last break was wearing off, and the gentle hum of the engine wasn't helping her stay alert. She cracked the window open slightly, letting the cool night air rush in. The fresh air helped clear her mind a bit. The streets in this part of town were familiar to her now. After months of working this case, she knew every shortcut, every dark alley, every speed trap. She'd chosen this route home specifically because it was usually empty at this hour, just straight roads and well-spaced traffic lights. Perfect for someone who needed to decompress after a long operation. Rodriguez glanced at her phone sitting in the cup holder. 3 missed calls from her sister in Miami. She made a mental note to call back tomorrow, or rather, later today. Her sister was probably worried. These long operations often meant radio silence for days. It was the hardest part of the job sometimes, not being able to tell your family why you couldn't answer their calls or make it to important events. The streetlights cast long shadows across the road as she drove past the local high school. During the day, this area would be bustling with teenagers and school buses. Now, it was just her and the occasional raccoon searching through someone's trash bins. She smiled, remembering her own high school days, long before she even thought about joining the FBI. Her eyelids were getting heavier with each passing minute. The field office was just 20 minutes away now. 20 minutes, then another hour of preliminary paperwork, and she could finally head home. Maybe she'd treat herself to breakfast at that 24-hour diner near the office. Their pancakes were legendary among the night shift agents. Just as she was planning her pancake order, bright lights suddenly filled her rearview mirror. Red and blue lights started flashing, accompanied by a short burst from a police siren. Rodriguez checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. Her turn signals were working fine. She just had the car serviced last week. She went through a mental checklist of everything that could be wrong as she carefully signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. This wasn't her first time being pulled over in an unmarked car, and she knew exactly how to handle it. But something felt different about this stop. Maybe it was her exhaustion playing tricks on her mind, or maybe it was years of investigative instincts kicking in, but she had a feeling this routine traffic stop was about to become anything but routine. As she put the car in park and turned down the radio, Rodriguez could see 2 officers approaching in her side mirrors, one on each side of her car. Their hands were resting near their holsters, standard procedure for a night stop, but it still made her heart beat a little faster. She took a deep breath and placed her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, waiting for what was about to unfold. Officer Reynolds hadn't planned on working the graveyard shift tonight. His youngest had been running a fever, and he tried to swap shifts with another officer. But when Thompson called in sick, Reynolds knew he had to step up. His wife had given him that look. The one that said she understood but wished things were different. He'd promised to make it up to them this weekend with a trip to the zoo. Now, 4 hours into his shift, Reynolds and his partner, Officer Cooper, were patrolling the quiet streets of their district. Cooper was relatively new to the force, just 8 months out of the academy. He was eager, maybe a little too eager sometimes, but Reynolds appreciated his attention to detail. They'd been discussing Cooper's upcoming sergeant exam when they spotted the black sedan making what looked like an illegal lane change. "Did you see that?" Cooper asked, sitting up straighter in his seat. They didn't signal until halfway through the lane change. Reynolds nodded, watching the sedan carefully. In his 15 years on the force, he'd learned that something as simple as a traffic violation could lead to much more, especially in this area where they'd seen a spike in drug trafficking over the past few months. Central, Unit 247, Reynolds radioed in. "We're initiating a traffic stop on a black sedan license plate." He read out the numbers as Cooper ran the plates. The car was registered to a leasing company, not unusual, but worth noting. As they activated the lights and siren, Reynolds noticed something different about this stop. The driver's reaction was too perfect. The turn signal, the smooth pullover, the precise distance from the curb. Most civilians were either too nervous or too careless to execute such a textbook stop. "Something feels off," Reynolds muttered to Cooper as they prepared to exit their patrol car. The dashboard clock showed 2:23 a.m. The street was empty except for their 2 vehicles, and the nearby streetlight was flickering irregularly, casting strange shadows across the scene. "I've got your 6, Cooper responded, his hand resting near his holster. They'd been trained for this. Approach with caution, maintain visual contact, watch for sudden movements. But training was one thing, real-world situations were another beast entirely. Reynolds approached the driver's side while Cooper took the passenger side, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior of the sedan was clean, almost too clean for a civilian vehicle. No fast food wrappers, no coffee cups, no shopping bags, just a phone in the cup holder and what looked like a laptop bag in the back seat. The driver's posture caught Reynolds' attention immediately. Hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, perfectly still, head forward, but obviously tracking their movements in the mirrors. This wasn't the typical body language of someone who just made a simple traffic mistake. This person had training. His mind raced through the possibilities. Law enforcement, military, or maybe something less legitimate. They'd received bulletins about cartel members using police tactical training to blend in better. The recent drug trafficking cases in the area had everyone on edge. "Good evening," Reynolds said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "I'm Officer Reynolds with the County Police Department." He noticed the driver's slight nod, another practice movement. "Do you know why we pulled you over tonight?" The inside of the car smelled like coffee and something else, the distinct odor of surveillance van equipment. Reynolds had spent enough time in joint operations to recognize it. His instincts were screaming now, but he couldn't tell if they were warning him of danger or something else entirely. Cooper was maintaining his position, scanning the vehicle's interior from the passenger side. Through their years of working together, they'd developed a silent language. A slight tap of fingers on the car's frame meant something was off, but not necessarily threatening. The whole scene felt like a chess game where neither player wanted to make the first move. The driver hadn't spoken yet, hadn't reached for anything. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. A car passed by on the distant highway, its sound echoing off the buildings. A dog barked somewhere in the neighborhood. But on this street, at this moment, time seemed to stand still as Reynolds waited for the driver's next move. He noticed a supple shift in the driver's shoulder, the kind of movement that preceded reaching for credentials. His hand instinctively moved closer to his holster, not drawing but ready. After 15 years on the force, he'd learned that these moments, these split seconds of uncertainty, were when everything could change. The streetlight above them flickered again, and Reynolds caught a glimpse of something in the back seat. Was that a tactical vest? The kind federal agents used? Or was it something else entirely? In this light, with adrenaline flowing, it was hard to be sure of anything. "License and registration, please," Reynolds finally said, breaking the tension. Whatever was about to happen, they needed to move this situation forward. His flashlight beam remained steady on the driver's hands, ready for whatever came next. "My credentials are in my jacket pocket," The driver announced calmly, her voice steady and professional. "I'm going to reach for them now." The way she announced her movements, it was textbook law enforcement protocol. Reynolds noticed Cooper adjust his stance slightly on the passenger side, acknowledging the familiar procedure. The inside of the car remained dimly lit by the patrol car's headlights and the flickering street lamp above. Reynolds kept his flashlight beam steady as the driver slowly moved her right hand from the steering wheel. Her movements were deliberate, almost like a training video demonstration. "I'm a federal agent," she stated, her hand moving with practiced precision toward her inside jacket pocket. Reynolds felt his chest tighten. This could go either way. In his years on the force, he'd dealt with people impersonating federal agents before. Some had been surprisingly convincing. The leather credential holder emerged from her pocket, held carefully between two fingers. As she opened it, the gold FBI badge caught the flashlight's beam, glinting in the darkness. "Special Agent Rodriguez, FBI," she said, her tone professional, but with a hint of exhaustion that felt genuine. Reynolds studied the credentials carefully, shining his light directly on the badge and ID card. Everything looked legitimate: the holographic security features, the badge number, the photo ID. But something in his gut told him to dig deeper. Maybe it was the recent briefing about cartel tactics, or maybe it was just years of experience telling him that 2 a.m. traffic stops were never simple. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle, Agent?" Reynolds asked, keeping his voice neutral but authoritative. He saw a flicker of something cross her face. Annoyance? Resignation? Understanding? It was gone before he could be sure. "Of course," she replied, again narrating her movements. "I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt and open the door slowly." The car door opened with a soft click, and she emerged with the same controlled movements she'd shown throughout the encounter. Standing under the streetlight, Reynolds could see her more clearly now. Her suit was wrinkled in a way that suggested long hours sitting in one position. Dark circles under her eyes hinted at an extended operation, and he noticed the subtle bulge of a service weapon under her jacket. Cooper maintained his position, his experience showing in how he adjusted his stance to keep both Reynolds and the driver in his line of sight. The night had grown quieter, as if the whole street was holding its breath, waiting to see how this would unfold. "I understand the precaution," Rodriguez said, breaking the silence. "There's been an uptick in cartel activity in this area. I did the same in your position." She stood with her hands visible, her posture suggesting she'd been on both sides of this situation before. Reynolds noted how she mentioned the cartel activity. It was current intel, the kind that hadn't made it to the public yet. Another point in favor of her credentials being genuine, but he still needed to verify. Too many things could go wrong if he made assumptions. "I'm going to call this in," he informed her, taking a step back while maintaining visual contact. "Standard procedure." She nodded, a look of professional understanding crossing her tired features. Reynolds could almost see her mentally adding another hour to what had clearly already been a long night. The radio crackled as he called in the badge number. The dispatcher's voice came back clear in his earpiece, running the verification process. These moments always felt longer than they actually were, the wait while someone somewhere typed numbers into a database. A cool breeze swept through the street, carrying the distant sound of a passing train. Rodriguez shifted her weight slightly, the kind of unconscious movement that comes from standing still too long after hours of sitting. It was such a human gesture that Reynolds found himself wanting to believe her story. "You been on surveillance?" he asked, partly to fill the silence, and partly because the pieces were starting to fit together: the clean car, the coffee smell, the exhausted but alert demeanor. 14 hours in a van," she replied with a tired half-smile. Not exactly the glamorous part of the job they show on TV. There was something genuine in how she said it, a shared understanding between law enforcement professionals about the less exciting reality of their work. Cooper caught Reynolds' eye from his position, giving a subtle nod. He'd noticed the same things, the small details that were hard to fake. The way she kept her feet positioned for balance, how her eyes regularly scanned their surroundings without being obvious about it, the automatic way she kept track of both officers' positions. The radio suddenly came to life again. Reynolds listened intently to the dispatcher's voice, his expression unchanged as he processed the information. But this routine traffic stop was about to become anything but routine. The dispatcher's voice crackled through Reynolds' earpiece. Unit 247, be advised. We have a report of a similar vehicle involved in a drug transport incident 30 minutes ago. Black sedan, possibly a federal clone car. Approach with extreme caution. Reynolds' posture shifted almost imperceptibly. 15 years of experience had taught him how quickly situations could change. He watched Rodriguez's face, looking for any reaction to suggest she'd overheard the dispatch, but she maintained her professional composure. "We're going to need you to stay right there," Reynolds said, his voice taking on a firmer edge. "Cooper, call for backup." The words hung in the cool night air like morning fog. Both officers' hands moved closer to their weapons, not drawing, but ready. Rodriguez's expression changed from tired understanding to alert concern. "Officer," she began, her voice steady but carrying a note of urgency, "I can explain. I've been tracking a cartel operation all night. The vehicle you're hearing about might be connected to our case." The sound of distant sirens began to float through the night air. Cooper maintained his position, speaking quietly into his radio. The streetlight above them continued its irregular flickering, creating an almost strobe-like effect that made everything feel slightly surreal. "Ma'am, I'm sure you understand our position," Reynolds said, professional but firm. "We have protocols we need to follow." His mind was racing through possibilities. If she was really FBI, this could be a massive jurisdictional mess. If she wasn't, well, that was why backup was on the way. Rodriguez nodded slowly, her hands still visible. "I get it. I really do. But I need to make a call to my field office right now. We might have active surveillance units in danger if what you're hearing is connected to our operation." The urgency in her voice was genuine, but Reynolds had learned the hard way that conviction wasn't always truth. More patrol cars were approaching now. Their lights painted the street in alternating red and blue. The quiet suburban night had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. A dog started barking in a nearby yard, and a porch light flicked on in one of the houses. "Step back toward my voice," Reynolds instructed. Protocol demanded they secure her until everything could be verified. Rodriguez complied, but he could see the growing frustration in her movements. She understood the procedure but clearly felt the pressure of whatever operation she was involved in. "Officer, listen to me," she tried again, her professional demeanor starting to crack slightly under the weight of urgency. "I have a team in the field right now. If there's another vehicle out there matching this description, they could be walking into a trap. Just let me make one phone call." 2 more patrol cars pulled up, their bright spotlights creating harsh shadows across the scene. 4 more officers emerged, taking tactical positions. What had started as a simple traffic stop had evolved into something that would either be a great training example or a massive headache for everyone involved. Reynolds could feel the tension building. Too many things weren't adding up. The FBI credentials looked real, but so had others he'd seen over the years. The reported vehicle incident was too close in timing to ignore. Yet something about Rodriguez's reaction to the whole situation felt genuine, the kind of genuine that couldn't be easily faked. "Any hit on the badge number?" he called to Cooper, who was still on the radio with dispatch. The replay was lost in the sound of another siren approaching. Rodriguez shifted her weight again, and Reynolds could almost see her mentally calculating how much time was being lost. "You need to verify my credentials," she said, a hint of weary acceptance in her voice. "Call Special Agent Thompson at the field office. He's my direct supervisor. But please do it quickly. If that other vehicle is who I think it is, we're about to lose 6 months of work." One of the newly arrived officers approached Reynolds, speaking in low tones. Highway Patrol spotted another black sedan heading east on the interstate. Different plates, but similar make and model. The information added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. The neighborhood was definitely awake now. Curtains twitched in windows, and more porch lights were coming on. What had been a quiet suburban street just minutes ago now looked like a scene from a crime drama, complete with flashing lights and officers moving with purposeful tension. Cooper suddenly straightened up, his hand pressing his earpiece more firmly against his ear as he listened to something from dispatch. His expression changed, and he quickly moved toward Reynolds, speaking in urgent but hushed tones. Whatever he said made Reynolds' jaw tighten. The next few moments would determine whether this night would end in embarrassment or validation, and somewhere out there, if Rodriguez was telling the truth, a federal operation was hanging in the balance. Cooper's urgent whisper changed everything. "Boss, Highway Patrol just reported their sedan has diplomatic plates. This can't be the same vehicle." Reynolds processed this new information while watching Rodriguez, who was still standing perfectly still, hands visible, but with an intensity in her eyes that spoke of growing urgency. Something clicked in Reynolds' mind. Little details that had been nagging at him started falling into place. The way she held herself, the subtle signs of surveillance equipment in her car, even her exhaustion felt genuine. In 15 years on the force, he'd developed a sense for people trying to fake their way through a stop. This wasn't that. "Look at her shoes," Cooper said quietly, nodding toward Rodriguez's feet. Reynolds glanced down, noticing the scuff marks on her otherwise professional shoes, the kind you get from sitting in a surveillance van for hours, feet propped up on equipment cases. It was such a small detail, but it spoke volumes. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the smell of rain. More neighbors had emerged onto their porches, watching the scene unfold with the kind of curiosity that would fuel local gossip for weeks. The red and blue lights continued their rhythmic dance across the suburban landscape. Rodriguez shifted slightly, her professional demeanor cracking just enough to show real concern. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying a new edge of urgency, "I know you're doing your job, and you're doing it well. But every minute we stand here is another minute my team is in potential danger. That other vehicle you're tracking, they might be headed right for my surveillance team." Reynolds studied her face carefully. He'd seen plenty of criminals try to talk their way out of situations, but this felt different. There was a genuine professional respect in how she handled the stop, even as the situation escalated. She hadn't once tried to pull rank or make demands. She'd followed every procedure, even while arguing for urgency. A light drizzle began to fall, creating halos around the patrol car lights. Reynolds made a decision. "Cooper, run her name through the federal database again. Full credentials this time." He turned to Rodriguez, maintaining professional distance but softening his tone slightly. "Walk me through your operation, not the details, just the scope." Rodriguez took a breath, choosing her words carefully. 6 months tracking a cartel supply chain. Tonight was supposed to be routine surveillance, but something felt off about the target's movements. If there's another vehicle out there matching mine, it's not a coincidence. As she spoke, Reynolds noticed more details that supported her story. The supple earpiece wire running down her collar, standard FBI issue, not the knockoffs criminals usually used. The way she instinctively tracked movement in her peripheral vision while speaking. The tactical vest in her backseat was positioned exactly how federal agents stored them for quick access. Cooper's voice cut through the rain. "Boss, confirmation just came in from the FBI field office. They've got an active operation in the area. Her credentials check out." He paused, listening to his earpiece, and Highway Patrol lost visual on that other sedan near exit 47. Reynolds watched Rodriguez's reaction to this news. Her face showed genuine concern rather than relief, another telling detail. A fake agent would have relaxed at this point, thinking they were in the clear. Instead, she became more alert. "Exit 47, she repeated, her mind clearly racing. "That's less than 10 minutes from where my team is set up." She met Reynolds' eyes directly. "Officer, I know this has been by the book, and I respect that. But right now, I need to make a call to my team." The rain was falling steadily now, creating a soft backdrop to the tense scene. Reynolds thought about his own partners over the years, about times when backup had meant the difference between a good night and a bad one. He made another decision. "Stand down," he called to the other officers, who began lowering their weapons. To Rodriguez, he said, "Make your call." "But we're not done here." He stepped back, maintaining visual contact, but giving her enough space to reach for her phone. Rodriguez moved with controlled urgency, pulling out her phone while keeping her movements clear and visible, the habits of someone who understood both sides of this situation. As she dialed, Reynolds noticed how the other officers had positioned themselves, professional, alert, but with notably less tension. The scene had transformed. What had started as a high-risk traffic stop was evolving into something else. A moment of recognition between professionals who, despite their different jurisdictions, shared the same basic mission. The neighbors watching from their porches couldn't know it, but they were witnessing something rare. The moment when training, instinct, and mutual respect combined to turn a potential confrontation into an example of law enforcement at its best. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Rodriguez spoke quickly into her phone, her voice low but carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Reynolds exchanged glances with Cooper, both recognizing that their night was about to become much more interesting than a routine traffic stop. Rodriguez lowered her phone, her expression a mix of relief and renewed focus. My team's safe. They spotted the other vehicle pass by their location twice. They're maintaining distance but could use some local backup. She looked at Reynolds with professional respect. Your stop might have just prevented months of work from being blown. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming steadily on the patrol car roofs. Reynolds made a quick decision, one born from years of experience and gut instinct. Cooper, get on the radio. Tell dispatch we're coordinating with federal agents. He turned to Rodriguez. What do you need from us? The change in dynamics was subtle but clear. The tension of the traffic stop had transformed into the focused energy of a joint operation. The other officers picked up on it immediately, their postures shifting from containment to support. The other vehicle is likely counter-surveillance, Rodriguez explained, wiping rain from her face. They're trying to identify our observation posts. If they make our team, 6 months of work goes down the drain. She glanced at her watch. A practical one thing that had clearly seen its share of operations. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they circle back. Reynolds nodded, already formulating a plan. Cooper, coordinate with the units at exit 47. Have them maintain visual but no engagement. He looked at the gathering of patrol cars. We need to clear this scene. All these lights are attracting too much attention. The neighbors who had been watching from their porches were starting to retreat inside, driven back by the increasing rain. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The weather was adding an extra layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. I can have my team redirect the target, Rodriguez said, her mind clearly racing through scenarios. But we need your people to box in the counter-surveillance vehicle. They'll be looking for federal plates, not local patrol cars. She paused, then added with a hint of a smile, since you've already proved how good you are at traffic stops. Reynolds appreciated the professional acknowledgement. Give us the location. We'll run it as a routine traffic patrol. Nothing that would tip them off. He turned to the other officers, who were already moving back to their vehicles with practiced efficiency. Cooper returned, rain dripping from his uniform. Units in position around exit 47. They're running a standard patrol pattern. He handed Reynolds a tablet showing the local traffic grid. We've got cars here, here, and here. He pointed to key intersections. Rodriguez studied the tablet, her eyes scanning the map with the speed of someone used to making quick tactical decisions. Perfect. My team's observation post is here. She pointed to a spot 2 blocks from one of the patrol cars. If your people can maintain presence in these areas, we can funnel them away from our surveillance. The plan was coming together with the smooth efficiency of professionals who knew their jobs. Reynolds watched as his officers dispersed, their patrol cars pulling away one by one, reducing the scene's visibility. Only his and Cooper's car remained, lights now off. I need to get back to my post, Rodriguez said, checking her phone again. But I want you to know that was good police work back there. Not everyone would have been as thorough. She extended her hand, a gesture of professional respect. Reynolds shook it, noting the firm grip, just doing our job. Though I have to admit, it's not every night we pull over an FBI agent. The rain had soaked through his uniform, but he barely noticed. The adrenaline of the operation was keeping everyone focused. When this operation wraps up, Rodriguez added, heading back to her car, I'll make sure your department gets full credit for the assist. That counter-surveillance team would have made us if you hadn't delayed me here. She paused at her car door. Sometimes our best work comes from our mistakes, right? Cooper couldn't hide a grin. Boss, does this mean we technically helped the FBI by making a traffic stop that wasn't really a violation? The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on any of them. The radio crackled with updates from the units near Exit 47. Everyone's attention snapped back to the operation at hand. Rodriguez opened her car door but turned back one last time. "Officers? Thank you. Not just for the backup, but for doing it right, even when I was trying to rush you." Reynolds watched as she got into her car, noting how she immediately checked all her mirrors, the habits of someone who lived this life of constant vigilance. "Stay safe out there," he called, and meant it. In this moment, there were no jurisdictional boundaries, just professionals working together to get a job done. As Rodriguez's sedan disappeared into the rainy night, Reynolds and Cooper returned to their patrol car. The radio was already busy with coordinated movements of their units, working in concert with the federal operation. What had started as a routine traffic stop had turned into something that would definitely be worth writing up in the next day's report. 3 weeks later, Reynolds was finishing up his shift paperwork when Cooper stuck his head into the office. "Boss, you're going to want to see this." He was holding a formal-looking envelope with federal markings. The morning sun streamed through the precinct windows as Reynolds opened the letter. Inside was an official commendation from the FBI field office praising the department's assistance in what turned out to be a major drug trafficking bust. But what caught his attention was the handwritten note paper-clipped to the formal document. "Your traffic stop that night." The note read in neat handwriting. "It didn't just help us catch the counter-surveillance team. It helped us take down the entire operation. Sometimes being thorough pays off in ways we don't expect. Special Agent Rodriguez." Reynolds couldn't help but smile as he remembered that rainy night. The local news had covered the bust without knowing the full story, how a routine traffic stop had accidentally helped federal agents maintain their cover. The headlines focused on the drugs seized and arrests made, but the real story was about how different law enforcement agencies had worked together seamlessly when it mattered. The precinct had been buzzing with the news all week. A joint task force was being formed between local police and the FBI field office to better coordinate future operations. Reynolds had been asked to help develop new training protocols based on the incident, teaching officers how to handle similar situations where things aren't quite what they seem. "Did you hear what they found in that other sedan?" Cooper asked, leaning against the doorframe. "High-end surveillance equipment, countermeasures gear, the works. They were definitely trying to spot the FBI team that night." He shook his head. "If we hadn't delayed Agent Rodriguez with that stop." Reynolds nodded, remembering how close it had all been. The rain, the tension, the split-second decisions that could have gone very differently. He thought about Rodriguez's tired eyes and professional demeanor, how she'd maintained her cool even when the situation was getting complicated. Later that afternoon, Reynolds was grabbing coffee at his regular spot when he noticed a familiar face at the counter. Rodriguez was there, looking much more rested than the last time he'd seen her, wearing casual clothes instead of a wrinkled suit. "Officer Reynolds," she said with a genuine smile. "I was hoping I'd run into you here. Your department's been very helpful with the task force setup." She gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Got a minute?" Over coffee, they talked about that night, not as federal agent and local cop, but as two professionals who'd found common ground in an unexpected situation. Rodriguez shared how her team had nearly packed up their operation when they spotted the counter-surveillance vehicle. "You know what really sold my credentials that night?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "It was how you noticed all the small details. The surveillance van smell, the scuffed shoes, the way I handled the stop. That's the kind of attention to detail we tried to teach at the academy." Reynolds mentioned how the incident had changed things at his precinct. Officers were more alert to the subtle signs that might indicate federal operations in their jurisdiction. The FBI traffic stop, as it had become known, was already becoming a teaching example for new recruits. "My kid finally got over that fever," Reynolds said, changing the subject. "Made it to the zoo like I promised. Even saw the lions this time." It was a small detail, but it reminded them both of how regular life continued alongside their duties. Rodriguez smiled. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Doing our jobs so people can live their normal lives. Take their kids to the zoo. Not worry about drug cartels operating in their neighborhoods." As they finished their coffee, a call came in on Reynolds' radio, a routine traffic stop a few blocks away. Some things never changed. But now, every traffic stop carried new possibility. You never knew when a simple pullover might turn into something bigger. Back to work? Rodriguez asked, recognizing the look on his face. Reynolds nodded, standing up. Always more work to do. Though I doubt this one will be as interesting as our last encounter. Stay safe out there, she said, echoing his words from that rainy night. As Reynolds headed back to his patrol car, he thought about how one traffic stop had created a bridge between agencies, improved procedures, and led to a major bust. But more than that, it had shown how law enforcement, at every level, worked best when they remembered the human element, when they took the time to be thorough, to look for details, and to respect each other's professionalism. The afternoon sun glinted off his patrol car as he pulled away from the coffee shop. Somewhere in the city, federal agents were running surveillance, local cops were making their rounds, and life was going on as usual. And if anyone noticed how local police and federal agents seemed to work together more smoothly these days, well, that was just another positive outcome from a wrong turn that turned out to be exactly right.